In a luxury hotel lobby, a wealthy woman publicly humiliates an elderly black janitor. Her arrogance stuns the crowd, while he stands calm and dignified. A symbolic moment changes the mood. His words pierce through the silence, and the chapter closes with a powerful cliffhanger that hints everything is about to turn upside down. "We don't hire people like you." The words sliced through the lobby like broken glass. Beneath chandeliers dripping with crystal light, conversations froze. The clink of glasses stopped. The gentle shuffle of polished shoes silenced. Every guest, every passerby, turned to look. At the center stood a woman wrapped in luxury. Her silk dress gleamed, her diamond bracelet caught the light with every gesture, and her chin tilted skyward as though the world itself was beneath her. Her voice carried arrogance like perfume, heavy, suffocating, and impossible to ignore. In front of her was James, 70 years old, a black janitor with a faded uniform and hands calloused from decades of labor. His broom was worn but spotless, carried with the quiet pride of a man who believed in dignity no matter how small the task. His back bent slightly with age, but his eyes remained steady, unbroken. "You shouldn't be seen here," the woman continued, her tone dripping disdain. "Our guests come for beauty, for luxury, not to watch. This," she gestured toward him as though his very presence was dirt beneath her heel. The lobby shifted. A young couple near the reception desk frowned. Two businessmen whispered, awkward, unsure whether to laugh or retreat. A bellhop froze in place, clutching a stack of towels, his mouth slightly open. Everyone watched, but no one spoke. The woman stepped closer, her heels clicking like gunshots against marble. She snatched the broom from James's hands. For one breath, she held it like a trophy. Then, with a sudden swing, she smashed it against the floor. The brittle wood snapped. Half of it skidded across the tiles, spinning until it clattered to a stop. The crack echoed. A gasp rose from the onlookers. The broken broom lay there, not just wood, but a symbol of crushed dignity, discarded for spectacle. James bent down slowly. His knees creaked, his movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. He picked up the broken piece, his weathered fingers wrapping around it as though reclaiming more than splintered wood. He rose again, standing tall in silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, low, but strong enough to fill the space. "Trash isn't what I sweep from these floors," he said. His eyes locked onto hers. "Trash is what people carry inside their hearts." The silence that followed was heavier than the insult. Heads lowered. Guests shifted uncomfortably. The chandeliers seemed dimmer, the air thicker. For the first time, the woman's certainty faltered. A flicker of doubt crossed her face, quickly smothered by pride. She sneered, lifting her chin higher. "Do you even know who I am?" she demanded, her words trembling on the edge of control. James's lips curved into the faintest smile. His gaze never wavered. "Yes," he said softly. "And soon everyone else will know too." Her expression cracked, not broken yet, but hairline fractures of fear creeping through the mask of arrogance. Then came the sound. Footsteps. Strong, measured, echoing through the marble chamber. Every head turned toward the grand glass doors. A tall man walked in. Navy suit pressed sharp, silver tie knotted perfectly. His presence was magnetic, a kind of gravity that bent the room toward him. Authority radiated from his stride. The woman's face transformed instantly. Relief flooded her features. She plastered on a sweet, artificial smile. Her voice, suddenly sugar-soft, rang out, "Darling." But the man did not look at her. His eyes, hard and unwavering, were locked only on James. His steps quickened, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable but heavy with intent. The woman's smile froze. The lobby fell into a hush so deep even the fountain in the corner seemed to pause its trickle. Guests exchanged glances. Something in the air was shifting. The man drew closer. His hand clenched at his side. Every gaze followed him as he stopped directly in front of James, ignoring his wife entirely. And then, in that suspended moment, the unthinkable seemed about to happen. The husband's next action would not be to defend his wife, but to bow before the man she had tried to break. The man stopped just inches away from James. The lobby held its breath. Every pair of eyes locked on him, waiting for the outburst that seemed inevitable. But no outburst came. Instead, he lowered his head. His shoulders bowed. And then, slowly, deliberately, he sank to one knee. A ripple of shock surged through the crowd. A businessman whispered, "Is he kneeling?" Another woman gasped so loudly her pearls rattled against her chest. Even the bellhop dropped the towels in his arms. The fabric scattering across the marble floor. The wealthy woman froze in disbelief. "What are you doing?" she hissed. Her voice cracked, stripped of its usual authority. "Stand up this instant." Her husband didn't move. His voice was steady but thick with emotion. "Mr. James," he said, looking up into the old man's eyes, "I owe you more than I can ever repay." The words detonated in the silence. Guests exchanged bewildered looks. "Mr. James?" Respect wrapped in formality. Not janitor. Not servant. "Mr. The woman's mouth opened, but no words came. Her lips trembled. This wasn't the script she had written for herself, not the public display of dominance she craved. James remained still. His face revealed nothing but quiet patience. His hand, still holding the broken broom handle, rested against his side like a reminder of what had just been shattered. Finally, James spoke. His tone was even, not triumphant, not angry. "You don't need to kneel," he said, but the man shook his head. "Yes, I do." His voice broke just for a second. He clenched his jaw, gathering himself. "Because years ago, when no one else believed in me, you did. You gave me work when I had nothing. You treated me like a man when the world saw me as worthless." Murmurs spread through the lobby. The narrative was shifting, pulling away from the woman's control. She tried to regain it. "This is ridiculous," she spat. "You're humiliating yourself for a janitor." Her husband rose slowly, his eyes finally cutting to hers. "No," he said firmly. "You've humiliated yourself," her breath caught. His words, sharp and public, sliced through the air louder than any slap could have. For the first time in years, perhaps ever, her power slipped. The onlookers felt it too. The couple near the desk straightened, almost proud of the man's defiance. The bellhop's lips twitched with something dangerously close to a smile. The businessman who had whispered now stood silent, eyes averted. James shifted slightly, adjusting his grip on the broken broom. His silence was heavier than any speech. It forced the woman to confront herself and forced the guest to examine what they had just witnessed. Her husband stepped closer to him. "Mr. James," he said, his voice quieter now, intimate but still audible to all, "I will never forget what you did for me. And I won't let anyone, not even my wife, disrespect you again." The woman's eyes darted around the room, searching for support. None came. Not a single guest met her gaze. The silence was a verdict. Her mask cracked. The perfect smile, the flawless posture, both gone. What remained was panic. James finally spoke again, his words measured. "Respect is not something you demand," he said softly. "It's something you earn." The woman flinched. The truth was louder than her insults. Her husband placed a steady hand on James's shoulder, not as a master to a servant, but as one man acknowledging another. The gesture resonated across the marble floor like a quiet revolution. The moment lingered, heavy with the weight of change. Then, with all eyes on her, the woman turned sharply. Her heels clicking too quickly now, each step a retreat rather than a command. The crowd parted for her, not in respect but in silence. James stood unmoved, his broken broom still in hand, his dignity unbroken. As the woman fled, whispers began among the guests, questions about who James really was, and why the man in power knelt before him. The lobby didn't return to normal. It couldn't, not after what had just happened. Though the woman stormed out, her heels striking like thunder fading into the distance, the atmosphere remained thick, electric. Conversations began in hushed tones, like sparks igniting tinder. "Did you see that?" One man whispered near the bar. "Her husband kneeling?" "To the janitor?" "He called him Mr. James," another replied, disbelief bending his voice. Like he owed him something. From the far side of the room, two women in evening gowns leaned closer, their jewelry catching the light. "There has to be a story," one said. "You don't bow like that for nothing." James stood where he always had, broom broken, body still. But his stillness wasn't weakness. It was command. Though he said nothing, the crowd's energy orbited around him, as though the marble beneath his shoes was the true center of the room. The husband, Robert Whitmore, owner of the luxury chain, remained at his side. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't posturing. His hand still lingered near James's shoulder, as though grounded by the contact. "You didn't have to do that," James said finally, his tone calm, almost weary. "I did," Robert answered. His voice was quiet, but audible enough for the nearest guest to hear. "Because the world has forgotten what I never will," murmurs rippled again. "Forgotten what?" The phrase caught ears like a hooked-out Robert turned, his eyes sweeping across the lobby. "This man," he declared, "once saved me. He gave me dignity when I had none. Before these hotels, before the wealth, before all of this," he gestured at the glittering space around them, "there was a time I was nothing. And he was the one who believed in me." The crowd shifted, their weight unsettled. The businessman who had once looked smug now bit his lip. The bellhop, still frozen in place, stared at James with wide-eyed reverence. James's gaze lowered. He didn't revel in the recognition. Instead, he shook his head lightly, his voice firm but gentle. "I gave you a job. That's all. You did the rest." Robert's jaw tightened. "No," he said. "You gave me more than a job. You gave me back my worth." The words landed like stones dropped in water, rippling outward. Near the reception desk, a woman whispered, "So the janitor helped him rise?" "No," her companion murmured. "Not just helped, saved." The whispers grew. They traveled from one corner of the lobby to another, threads weaving into rumor, rumor twisting into story. And every version centered around James. Meanwhile, the woman, Eleanor Whitmore, lingered just beyond the entrance, her face burning with humiliation. She could hear them. She could feel the power slipping away, reputation unraveling faster than she could catch it. "This isn't over," she hissed under her breath, though no one was listening. Her perfect posture had collapsed into stiff defensiveness, her smile replaced with a snarl hidden behind trembling lips. Inside, James finally moved. He walked toward the broken broom handle still lying on the floor. Picking it up, he carried both splintered pieces and set them gently against the wall, as though even in their brokenness they deserved care. The symbolic gesture did not go unnoticed. A young guest whispered, "He treats even broken things with respect." Another nodded slowly. "That's what makes him different," Robert straightened, adjusting his suit, but his tone carried weight that stripped away the polish of wealth. "From this day forward," he announced, "anyone who works in this place will be treated with dignity. No exceptions." Applause did not erupt, not yet. But the silence that followed was sharper than any cheer. It was the silence of realization, of a truth too powerful to dismiss. James looked at him, eyes narrowing slightly. "Words are easy," he said. "But people watch what you do, not what you say." Robert nodded once, gravely. "Then watch me." The guests exchanged glances, unsure if they had just witnessed the beginning of something larger than themselves. The woman outside clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms. Her carefully built image, the perfect wife, the untouchable socialite, was cracking. And James? He turned back to his work, his dignity intact, as though nothing had changed. Yet everything had. Whispers spread beyond the lobby, into the city, into the press. Soon, the world would begin asking, who exactly is this janitor that powerful men kneel before? Eleanor Whitmore slammed the penthouse door behind her. The echo rattled through the expensive suite, bouncing off crystal vases and framed artwork that screamed luxury but couldn't mask her humiliation. She ripped off her diamond necklace, tossing it onto the bed with shaking hands. Her reflection in the gilded mirror glared back at her, but not the confident, flawless socialite she had cultivated. This reflection had cracks, eyes burning, lips twisted, pride wounded. "How dare he?" she muttered, pacing in her heels across the marble floor. A janitor. A nobody. And Robert. Bowing to him? Her fists clenched. They were all watching. Every single one of them. She collapsed into a velvet chair, pressing her palms to her temples. The scene replayed in her mind like a nightmare. Robert's hand on James's shoulder. The whispers, the broken broom treated with respect. Even the silence had condemned her more loudly than any shout. Outside, the city glimmered through the windows, but the light did not comfort her. Tonight, it mocked her. Downstairs, the lobby pulsed with whispers. Guests clustered in corners, their voices hushed but insistent. "I heard the janitor used to be Robert's boss." No. He saved him from bankruptcy years ago. Someone said he used to run a company himself. The rumors shifted shape with every retelling, but all carried the same weight. James was not who he appeared to be. A young journalist, badge tucked discreetly into his pocket, lingered near the bar. His eyes were sharp, ears tuned like instruments. He scribbled notes onto a napkin, his excitement barely contained. A headline was forming in his mind, one that would travel farther than this lobby. Meanwhile, James continued his quiet work. The broken broom was gone, replaced by another. He swept slowly, his movements unhurried, though every step seemed to echo louder than the clinking glasses and murmuring voices around him. Staff watched differently now. The bellhop who had once stiffened in fear straightened proudly when James passed by. The concierge, who usually avoided eye contact, nodded respectfully. Even the chef peeked out from the kitchen doorway, offering a subtle bow of acknowledgement. But James didn't revel in it. He swept, he cleaned, he moved on, his dignity the same as it had been hours before Dot in the penthouse. Eleanor rose abruptly, determination burning. She would not let this narrative spread unchecked. She had worked too hard, climbed too high, to let her reputation crumble because of one man with a mop. She picked up her phone, dialing a familiar number. "Yes, it's me," she said sharply. "I want every file you can dig up on the hotel's janitor. Everything. Where he came from. What he's hiding. Any dirt you can find. I don't care what it costs." The voice on the other end hesitated. "You're sure about this, Eleanor?" "Sometimes digging. Just do it." She snapped. "If I fall, he falls harder." She ended the call, tossing the phone aside. Her reflection smirked back at her, though the cracks remained. Below, Robert sat alone in his office, head in his hands. A confrontation had shaken him too, though differently. He thought of the years past, a younger version of himself, broken, jobless, and ashamed. And James, offering him a chance when no one else had. How did I let Eleanor become this? He thought bitterly. How did I let her treat others the way I was once treated? He sighed heavily. Change was coming. He could feel it. Back in the lobby, the journalist slipped out quietly, his notepad full. Tomorrow the whispers would not remain whispers. Tomorrow the city would know Dot and upstairs. Eleanor stared out at the skyline, convinced she was in control. Even as the cracks in her carefully polished mirror widened. The next morning, a headline hits the press, and Eleanor discovers she is no longer the one shaping the story. The morning light crept through the towering glass walls of the Whitmore Hotel, bathing the lobby in a golden glow. For most, it was a fresh beginning. For Eleanor, it was the start of a nightmare. A crisp newspaper slid across the breakfast table in the penthouse. Robert unfolded it silently, his eyes dark with recognition. Bold black letters screamed from the front page. Mysterious janitor humiliates socialite in public showdown. Below the headline, a grainy photograph captured the moment, Eleanor's hand midair as she flung the broom. Robert's knees bent toward James, and James standing tall despite the broken stick at his feet. Eleanor's face twisted. Who authorized this picture? Who let them print this filth? She slammed her palm onto the table, rattling fine china. Robert didn't answer. He stared at the photo, haunted not by Eleanor's anger but by James's quiet dignity frozen in ink. Eleanor grabbed the paper, tearing it into jagged pieces. This is nothing. A tabloid trying to sell copies. By next week, no one will care. But downstairs, the truth was already spreading faster than she imagined. Guests lingered over their own copies of the paper in the lobby cafe. Conversations buzzed between sips of coffee and clinks of porcelain cups. Can you believe it? The janitor, standing against her like that, she looked ridiculous. Did you see her face? Robert kneeling. Maybe there's history there. The staff moved with unusual energy, their whispers carrying pride instead of shame. The bellhop tucked a folded newspaper under his arm like a badge of honor. The concierge smiled faintly as he greeted guests. No longer shrinking under Eleanor's gaze, James himself walked through the lobby, cart rattling softly as he collected linens. His eyes passed over the newspapers, but he didn't reach for one. He didn't need to. The truth wasn't in print. It was in the way people looked at him now, not with dismissal, but with acknowledgement. Still, he felt a knot in his chest. Attention was a double-edged blade, and James had lived long enough to know that admiration today could become exploitation tomorrow. He carried on, silent, methodical, sweeping his path clean one step at a time. In her penthouse, Eleanor dialed again, voice sharp. You promised me results. I need dirt on this man now. His record, his debts, his failures. Find me something to destroy him. The voice on the other end sighed. Eleanor, every record we pull up on him comes back clean. Too clean. It's as if what? As if what? She demanded. As if someone erased his past deliberately. I don't know who he really is, but he's not just a janitor. Eleanor froze. The phone slipped slightly in her grip. Her heart thudded with both rage and fear. She ended the call abruptly, staring out at the skyline. Not just a janitor, she whispered to herself. The phrase itched at her pride. Meanwhile, Robert left the penthouse quietly, descending into the lobby. He found James folding fresh towels near the service desk. For a moment, Robert hesitated, memories pressing heavy on his chest. Then he spoke softly. James, we need to talk. James looked up, calm as ever. His eyes carried no anger, no smugness. Only patience. Then talk, he said simply. But before Robert could respond, a guest approached, newspaper in hand. She extended it toward James, her voice trembling. Sir, I just wanted to say, thank you for standing with dignity, for showing what respect looks like. Her words caught James off guard. He nodded politely, but his silence spoke more powerfully than any speech. Robert watched, guilt swelling inside him. He knew the truth. He knew why James was here, and he knew the time was coming when that truth would no longer remain hidden. Upstairs, Eleanor plotted her next move. She would not bow. She would not let her empire of status crumble. But even as she clenched her fists, the whispers in print were louder than her protests. Spreading through streets, cafes, offices, and homes by sunset, Eleanor's insult had become the city's story. And James, without lifting his voice, had become its symbol. Eleanor receives an envelope on her desk, one that reveals James's hidden past, and why Robert's respect runs deeper than anyone imagined. The envelope arrived without warning. A cream-colored slip, hand-delivered by a bellhop who didn't dare ask questions. It sat on the polished glass desk of the penthouse suite, its edges sealed with wax, its surface unmarked except for a single word written in black ink. Truth. Eleanor hesitated, fingers trembling. The city was buzzing with whispers, the press feeding on her humiliation, and now this anonymous message mocked her from her own desk. With a swift motion, she tore the seal and slid the contents out. Inside were photocopied documents, faded but clear enough to read. The first bore a company letterhead, Whitmore Industries, 1997. Her eyes narrowed. The name was her husband's Robert's company before his marriage, before their wealth had grown tenfold. She scanned the words, bankruptcy filing, foreclosure, staff layoffs. At the bottom, one signature leapt from the page, James Carter. She frowned, flipping to the next sheet. It was a contract, notarized and stamped. James Carter had purchased a controlling share of Whitmore Industries during its collapse. But instead of stripping it bare, he had restructured, saving dozens of jobs, including Robert's own position. The final page was a resignation letter. James Carter, CEO, stepping down quietly after stabilizing the company, leaving Robert in charge. Eleanor's chest tightened. The janitor, the man she had humiliated, was the very reason her husband still had a fortune, still had a legacy. Her hand shook as she whispered, "He owned us." He owned everything. For a moment, a rare silence filled her, a silence that smelled of truth and humiliation. Then her pride flared again, hotter, angrier. No, this is manipulation. He planted this. He's trying to rewrite history. She crumpled the papers. But even in her fists, the words burned. Meanwhile, in the lobby, James polished the marble floor. His movements were steady, deliberate, as though the world outside his mop bucket did not exist. Yet he felt the stares, heard the softened voices. Guests nodded as they passed. Some even whispered his name like it carried weight. James Carter. Wasn't he someone important once? Maybe still is, but James did not answer their curiosity. He bent, wiped, and moved on. Every stroke of the mop a rejection of the spotlight. Robert entered the lobby, spotting him across the polished expanse. For a long moment he didn't approach. Memories crowded his mind. The young man he once was, broken and desperate, begging James for a chance. James had given him more than that. He had given him back his life. Finally, Robert stepped forward. James. The janitor paused, raising his eyes, calm, quiet, unmoved. Robert lowered his voice. She knows now. About the past. About what you did. James straightened slowly, leaning on the mop handle. It was never about hiding, he said softly. It was about living. Pride isn't worth anything if it means stepping on others. Robert swallowed hard, guilt coiling in his chest. I should have defended you years ago. I let her treat people like I once was treated. James gave a faint, tired smile. You can't change what's past, but you can decide what kind of man you'll be tomorrow. Above them, Unseen, Eleanor watched from the mezzanine balcony. The crumpled envelope still burned in her pocket. Her nails dug into the railing as she glared at the scene below, her husband confiding in the janitor, the staff watching with admiration, the guests whispering with respect. "This is my hotel," she muttered under her breath. "My stage. And I won't be upstaged by a ghost from the past." She turned on her heel, storming back to the penthouse. The documents haunted her thoughts. Every whisper in the lobby felt like a dagger. But instead of surrendering, she hardened, plotting her counterstrike. If James Carter thought humility was his strength, Eleanor would expose it as weakness. If the world wanted to believe in his dignity, she would dig until she found the flaw. By dusk, she was on the phone again. Hire someone to follow him, day and night. I want every detail, every move, every weakness. Find it. As the call ended, she stared out at the skyline, where the city glowed with energy that no longer seemed to orbit around her. But in the lobby, James moved like the eye of a storm, calm, unshaken, and quietly pulling everyone into his gravity. That night, the hired investigator trails James and what he uncovers about James's secret evening ritual changes everything. The city at night shimmered like a restless ocean. Neon signs flickered against dark glass towers, car horns echoed down narrow streets, and somewhere in the hum of it all, James Carter moved quietly, unnoticed except by the man hired to follow him. The investigator, a wiry man with sharp eyes and a trench coat pulled tight, kept his distance. His camera hung at his side, lens glinting beneath the street lamps. He had tailed politicians, businessmen, even criminals, but never a janitor. This assignment, though, was different. Eleanor Whitmore had paid handsomely, and her instructions had been precise: find the dirt. No matter how small. James walked with purpose, his worn jacket blending into the city crowd. He didn't go to bars or restaurants. He didn't meet shady companions or slip into luxury cars. Instead, he turned down a quiet alley where a faint glow spilled from an old brick community center. The investigator crept closer, peering through a cracked window. Inside, the scene startled him. Children sat in mismatched chairs, their notebooks open, pencils scratching across pages. At the front stood James, his posture firm but gentle, guiding them through equations on a battered chalkboard. "Patience," James's voice carried through the glass. "Calm and steady. It's not about how fast you learn. It's about believing you can." The children leaned forward, listening intently, their eyes wide with admiration. The investigator frowned, lifting his camera. He snapped a few shots, but hesitation slowed his hand. This wasn't scandal. This wasn't dirt. This was noble. James moved among the students, pausing to kneel by a boy struggling with his sums. "You're not wrong," James said softly, tapping the paper. "You just haven't seen the answer yet. Keep trying. The answer will meet you halfway." The boy's eyes lit up as James's words sank in. For over an hour, James taught, never glancing toward the window, never breaking the rhythm of his calm encouragement. When the lesson ended, he handed out sandwiches wrapped in paper. The children ate hungrily, laughter filling the small space. The investigator lowered his camera, conflicted. He had followed men into brothels, casinos, and secret deals. This was different. This was a man who hid not vice but virtue. James finally stepped outside, locking the community center door behind him. The investigator melted back into the shadows, snapping one last picture. James beneath the lamplight, his face half shadowed, half glowing, the kind of image that carried weight beyond words. Later, the investigator sat in a diner, files spread across the table. He stared at the photographs. Children smiling, chalkboard covered in lessons, James handing out food. Not a shred of dirt. Instead, evidence of something Eleanor hadn't asked for. dignity too great to deny. When he finally returned to the Whitmore penthouse, Eleanor waited in silk robes, a glass of wine in her hand. "Well," she demanded, "what did you find? Where does he crawl at night? Gambling? Women? Drinking?" The investigator hesitated, then placed the envelope of photographs on the table. Eleanor's eager hands tore it open. Her eyes darted across the images, expecting filth. But what she saw made her face pale. Children, lessons, kindness. Her lip curled. "What is this?" She snapped out. The investigator cleared his throat. "It's the truth. He teaches kids in the evenings, volunteers, feeds them. That's all. That's all?" Eleanor slammed the photos down. "I paid you for weakness, not charity work." "Sometimes charity is strength," the investigator replied quietly. His eyes lingered on the last photo, James beneath the lamplight, steady as stone. "And sometimes it's the kind of strength you can't bury." Eleanor's wine glass trembled in her hand. "Get out," she hissed out when the door shut. She stood alone with the photographs, fury and confusion colliding inside her. She wanted to tear them, burn them, erase them. But she couldn't, because deep down, she knew the images carried more power than any headline, more truth than any rumor. Meanwhile, Robert found James sitting outside the hotel on a bench, gazing at the skyline. He sat beside him silently, the city lights flickering across both their faces. "I heard what you do at night," Robert said quietly. James didn't look at him. "I don't do it to be heard," Robert nodded, guilt and gratitude heavy in his chest. "You've always carried more than people know." "And I've carried less than I should admit." James turned finally, his calm eyes soft but piercing. "Then carry the right things now." A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the hum of traffic. And somewhere deep inside Robert, something shifted. The first crack in his long silence of complicity. The next morning, one of those photographs leaks, not to Eleanor, but to the press, transforming James from rumor to revelation. The morning broke with a brilliance the city rarely saw. Sunlight cut across rooftops and spilled into windows, washing away the shadows of the night. But for Eleanor Whitmore, no light could penetrate the darkness gnawing at her pride. She sat at the breakfast table, phone buzzing incessantly beside her. Every notification carried the same message, a photograph shared and reshared across social media, news sites, and blogs. The image was unmistakable: James Carter, kneeling beside a child with a notebook, chalk dust smudging his sleeve, kindness etched in his steady gaze. The headline beneath it read, "The Janitor Who Teaches, Dignity Beyond the Lobby." Eleanor's nails dug into the tablecloth. She had ordered an investigation to find weakness, but instead the world had been handed proof of strength. What infuriated her most was not the photograph itself, but the reaction. Everywhere, people spoke of James. Morning shows replayed the photo. Commentators dissected his humility, his hidden past, his quiet service. Hashtags bearing his name trended within hours. James Carter, hashtag dignity in silence, hashtag the janitor who teaches at the hotel cafe. Guests gathered in clusters, their newspapers spread wide. The photograph appeared above the fold, framed as though it belonged in a museum. "Look at him," one guest murmured. "Not a word spoken, yet he says more than all of them. Imagine the strength it takes to be humiliated and still serve others. He's not just a janitor. He's something bigger." James himself was sweeping near the lobby's revolving doors when the first guest approached with a folded paper in hand. "Sir," the man said, voice reverent, "they're talking about you." "The whole city." James glanced at the paper but didn't reach for it. "The city talks every day," he replied quietly. "Tomorrow it will talk about something else." But deep inside, he felt the weight of the photograph pressing against him. Not pride, not ego, but responsibility. He had never asked for eyes upon him. Yet now those eyes demanded something he had always tried to keep hidden. Robert, meanwhile, sat in his office with his head bowed over the same photograph. Memories stormed through him. The bankruptcy papers, the day James had offered him work, the nights he had doubted himself and found quiet encouragement in James's voice. And then came the bitter truth. While James had lived with dignity, Robert had built his empire on silence. He had let Eleanor sneer, dismiss, and crush others. He had stood by, pretending not to notice. "I can't be silent anymore," he thought, a tremor in his hands. "Not when the truth has already escaped me." Upstairs, Eleanor's fury boiled over. She hurled her glass across the room, shattering it against the wall. "They're worshiping him," she screamed. "A janitor. A man with no power, no name, and now they treat him like a saint." Her assistant hovered nervously. "Ma'am, the press is requesting a statement. They want to hear from you, from Mr. Whitmore." "Silence will only feed the fire." Eleanor spun, her eyes sharp as blades. "Silence is better than submission. If we speak, we legitimize him. If we answer, we kneel." But Robert's voice cut through, firm in a way Eleanor hadn't heard in years. "Sometimes kneeling is the only way to stand." Eleanor turned stunned. Robert's eyes were fixed on the photograph in his hand. "Don't you dare," she hissed. "Don't you dare take his side." Robert rose slowly, his face etched with quiet resolve. "It's not about sides, Eleanor. It's about truth. And I won't bury it anymore." That evening, a crowd began to form outside the hotel. Not protesters, not journalists, but ordinary people, parents, children, workers. They carried signs hastily painted with words pulled from the headlines. Dignity, respect, humility. James stepped outside briefly, drawn by the hum of voices. He saw them gathered beneath the glow of the hotel's lights, their eyes searching for him. A mother pushed her child forward. "Holding the newspaper photo, Mr. Carter," she said softly. "My son struggles in school." When he saw this picture, he said, "Maybe I can learn too." "You gave him hope." James's throat tightened. He had no prepared words, no speeches. "Only the truth. I am not more than you," he said simply. "I am not less either. We are all the same if we choose to see it." The crowd rippled with applause, not loud, not riotous, but steady, like a heartbeat. Inside, Eleanor watched from behind the glass doors, her chest rising and falling in sharp, angry bursts. She wanted to storm out, to reclaim the stage, to remind them who she was. But something in the air stopped her. It was not about wealth or titles anymore. It was about something she could not buy. That night, Robert stood beside James for the first time in years, not as an owner, not as a boss, but as a man who had been saved and never admitted it. "I owe you more than I can ever repay," Robert said quietly. James shook his head. "You owe it to yourself to be better than the man who stayed silent." The words struck deeper than Robert expected. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with a trembling breath, he replied, "Tomorrow I will speak." James looked at him, calm, measured, forgiving. "Then speak truth." Upstairs, Eleanor paced, her fists clenched, her empire trembling beneath her. She had sought to bury James with humiliation, but instead the world was lifting him up. Now, the very man she called husband was preparing to stand beside him. The next day, Robert steps before the cameras, and for the first time, the city hears the buried truth of James Carter's past from his own lips. The morning sun cast long shadows across the hotel's marble lobby, where cameras and microphones lined up like soldiers ready for war. Reporters jostled, cables stretched, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Something monumental was about to unfold. Robert Whitmore stood behind the podium, hands clasped, a tremor hidden beneath his tailored suit. For years he had lived behind Eleanor's voice, her arrogance shielding his silence. But now, the weight of James's quiet dignity, magnified by the photograph that had spread like wildfire, had broken the dam. Eleanor stood a few feet behind him, her face a mask of stone, eyes burning like coals. She had begged, threatened, pleaded the night before, but Robert had not bent. He could not. Not anymore. The cameras clicked. The red light blinked. Silence demanded words. "My name," Robert began, his voice low but steady, "is Robert Whitmore. Many of you know me as a hotelier, a man of means, a man who built something from nothing. That is the story I allowed to be told." He paused, inhaled sharply. His gaze drifted to James, who stood at the edge of the lobby, broom in hand, as if this spectacle had nothing to do with him. Calm, grounded, watching. "But that story," Robert continued, "is not true. The truth is, I was a man broken by failure. A man drowning in debt, stripped of dignity, and ready to give up." A ripple of murmurs surged through the crowd. The cameras leaned closer. Robert's hands gripped the podium tighter. "When my life fell apart, I was given work. Not by a banker, not by a partner, not by a politician. I was given work by James Carter, the man you know only as a janitor." The lobby gasped. Eleanor's jaw tightened. "He gave me a chance when I had nothing," Robert pressed on, voice gathering strength. "He did not mock my fall. He did not measure my worth by my wealth. He gave me dignity. He reminded me that I was still a man capable of standing again." For the first time in years, Robert's shoulders straightened. His silence, once his prison, now shattered. "And I repaid him with silence," Robert admitted, the shame heavy in his words. "I stood by while others humiliated him. I watched as he was dismissed, ignored, mocked, all while knowing the truth. I let my wife's arrogance become my shield. For that, I was a coward." The words struck like thunder. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras zoomed, and the crowd outside pressed closer against the glass. Robert turned slightly, his eyes finding James once more. "This man, this quiet, steady man, is more than the role you see him play. He is dignity when the world strips it away. He is the proof that humility is not weakness but strength." James's expression did not change. He gave no nod, no smile. Only calm. Eleanor could take no more. She surged forward, her voice sharp as a blade. "Enough of this nonsense. Do you know what you're doing? You're throwing away everything we've built. For a janitor? For a man who sweeps floors?" The crowd recoiled at her words, the venom in them unmistakable. The reporters' microphones turned instantly toward her, capturing every syllable. Robert did not flinch. His voice rose above hers, firm, resonant. "For the truth, Eleanor, I am throwing away the lies. And if what we built cannot survive the truth, then it was never worth building." Gasps filled the lobby. Eleanor froze, her fury eclipsed by the sudden isolation pressing in around her. For the first time, she stood not as the voice of the room, but as its intruder. Robert turned back to the cameras. "James Carter is not asking for recognition. He never has. But I can no longer stand by and let his dignity be trampled while I hide behind privilege. Today I speak the truth, not because it redeems me, but because it honors the man who once saved me when no one else would." He stepped back from the podium, his chest heaving, his face lined with both exhaustion and release. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions, flashes burst like lightning, and the crowd outside roared, their chants echoing against the marble walls. Through it all, James remained still, broom resting against his shoulder. Slowly, he turned and walked toward the exit, his step steady, unhurried. To him, nothing had changed. He had always known the truth, but to the city, everything had changed. Outside, the crowd parted as James stepped into the light. Their applause rose like a tide, yet he gave no wave, no bow. He simply walked, his calm presence louder than any speech. Robert followed a few steps behind, not as a leader, but as a man finally freed from silence. Eleanor, left inside the lobby, stared at the cameras now turned against her. For years she had spoken and the world had listened. But now, in the face of truth, her words sounded hollow. She opened her mouth to shout, but no one cared to hear. That evening, headlines across the nation blazed. Hotelier breaks silence. The janitor who saved him. Humility exposed. Arrogance unraveled. The truth behind the lobby, and in every photograph that ran, James was not caught speaking, not caught demanding, but simply standing, broom in hand, calm against the storm. He had said little, yet the silence around him now roared louder than Eleanor's empire ever had. Eleanor refuses to accept defeat quietly. In desperation, she begins to plot one final strike, a plan meant to destroy James completely. But the city she once commanded is no longer hers to control. The city awoke buzzing with headlines, the air thick with conversation. Taxi drivers spoke of it, cafe patrons debated it, and newspapers sold out by noon. James Carter, the janitor once ignored, had become the quiet storm no one could escape. But in the Whitmore penthouse, curtains drawn and voices sharp, Eleanor paced like a caged animal. Her manicured nails dug into her palms as she barked into her phone. I don't care what it takes. Dig deeper. Find something. He must have a weakness, something that proves he's not who they think he is. The voice on the other end hesitated. Mrs. Whitmore. We've looked. He has no scandals. No debts, no arrests. He's clean. Everyone has something. She snapped, hurling the phone against the wall. It shattered, a mirror of her crumbling composure. Robert sat silently across the room, eyes weary, voice low. You're not fighting James, Eleanor. You're fighting the truth. And that's a battle you can't win. Her glare cut across the room like a knife. You think I'll let him take everything from me? My name, my status, my power? Over my dead body. Robert rose slowly, meeting her fury with calm. He's not taking anything. You're giving it away, piece by piece. Every time you open your mouth. Eleanor turned away, but the words landed like stones in her chest. That afternoon, she staged her final act. She descended into the lobby dressed in black, her diamonds flashing, her entourage trailing. Cameras swiveled instantly, reporters sprinting to capture her. She lifted her chin, voice carrying. You've all been deceived. That man, James Carter, is not a hero. He's a fraud. A manipulator who preyed on my husband's weakness. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Eleanor continued, her words venomous. He hides behind silence because he has no truth. I've seen men like him before. Leeches feeding on pity, spinning stories to gain power they don't deserve. The lobby fell into uneasy quiet. Reporters hesitated, pens frozen mid-air. Even the cameras seemed to pause, waiting. And then, from the far corner, the soft scrape of a broom broke the silence. James stepped into view, shoulders straight, eyes calm. He did not raise his voice. He did not rush. He simply stood, broom resting lightly against his hand, and met Eleanor's fire with unshaken stillness. The crowd turned away from Eleanor toward him. Robert stepped forward, his voice steady. Enough, Eleanor. Every word you speak only buries you deeper. This man never asked for your recognition. He never sought your approval. He has more dignity in his silence than we've ever had in our names. Eleanor's mouth opened, but the crowd's reaction crushed her. Murmurs swelled into words. She's desperate. She can't stand losing. Control. She's finished. The cameras no longer framed her. They framed him. Eleanor's knees buckled, her balance faltering in her towering heels. For a flicker of a moment, her mask cracked, revealing not fury but fear. She reached for Robert, but he stepped back, his distance louder than rejection. James did not move. He did not gloat. His silence was enough. Reporters pressed microphones forward, not at Eleanor, but at Robert and James. Questions flew, but James gave no answer. Robert spoke only one line. "The truth does not need defending." The words echoed across the marble. Heavy, undeniable. By evening, the city had turned fully. Social media overflowed with clips. Eleanor raging, James standing calm, Robert's confession replayed again and again. Eleanor's once admired face became a meme, her fury dissected, mocked, pitied. Within days, sponsors withdrew. Invitations vanished. Her empire crumbled, not with a crash but with 1,000 quiet rejections. Robert, though shaken, found unexpected relief. He began walking the city streets without chauffeurs, greeting strangers without guards. For the first time in years, he breathed freely. And James? He continued as he always had. The broom swept across marble floors, the mop glided through quiet hallways. He did not trade silence for speeches. He did not sit for interviews. He remained the same, steady, grounded, unshaken. One evening, long after the cameras had turned elsewhere, a bellhop approached him quietly. "Mr. Carter," the young man said, voice trembling, "I just want to say thank you for showing me that dignity isn't about what you wear or what title you hold. It's about how you stand." James paused, leaning slightly on the broom. His eyes softened. He gave a small nod, no more, no less. Before returning to his work. In the penthouse above, Eleanor stared into her gilded mirror. Its cracks wider now, her reflection splintered. The silence in the room was suffocating, heavy, final. She whispered to herself, voice breaking, "How did I lose?" But deep down, she knew the answer. She had not been defeated by James's broom, nor Robert's words, nor the crowd's judgment. She had been undone by the weight of her own arrogance, collapsing under the silence she could never master. The world outside moved on, but the echo of James's dignity remained quiet, eternal, louder than any insult ever spoken, and in that silence the story ended.